Hello everybody and welcome back to Man vs. Artificial Intelligence. This is part number 3 in this series brought to you by the American Civil War Gaming Club. Now at the very start, I posed a number of questions concerning the artificial intelligence in these WDS games. And the very first question I tackled was, does the AI currently pose a challenge to an experienced player? And to test that out, I took on the computer with Campaign Antietam and the Battle of Antietam. The result of that game definitively showed, I believe, that the AI does not currently pose much of a threat to an experienced human player. And if I'm being honest, it was a painfully easy game for me to fight and to win. It was really so easy that it really wasn't any fun. The AI posed zero challenge, and they were easily defeated in this game. They just made one mistake after the other. As for myself, I did not even use Walker's division or AP Hill's division. And Longstreet's corps was also hardly used. Yet we just crushed our opponents. It was too easy. The AI has some serious issues which cause them problems. Just to name a few, they leave their leaders in front of their lines all the time. They make way too many column attacks, and really that should never happen at all. And the AI uses their artillery very poorly. So when you combine all these different issues, the AI just fails to offer a serious challenge to a human opponent. If you really want a challenge in these games, you have to play against a human opponent. And that's just the truth of the matter. If you're looking for a challenging and fun game, you have to play another human, because a human brain can calculate all of these different modifiers and strategies and tactics and everything going on. And we can make intelligent decisions based on the data in front of us. The AI, as it is currently configured, they just can't do that. Alright, let's go back to my original questions that I was addressing in this series. And let's move on to question number 2. Why does the AI exist? Now maybe this is a question which you think isn't very important, but I actually think that it is, and I believe it warrants some examination. So let's just put that question there on the top and ask that. Why does the AI exist? Well, I think it exists because it has to by default. It is almost an expectation that every game have some sort of AI elements in it to where you can play against the computer. Even when the game itself isn't really a single-player game, they will include a single-player option just to get people hooked into the game. Here are some classic examples of that. Battlefield 1942. A fantastic multiplayer game. I absolutely loved playing that game back in the day. When you played it in a multiplayer setting, it was so much fun. But the single-player campaign game was awful. Absolutely awful. Call of Duty Black Ops. I cannot tell you how much time I spent playing the multiplayer version of this game. The only game I liked perhaps more was Battlefield 1. Again, another fantastic game that was meant to be played multiplayer. Now all 3 of these games do have a single player option, and all 3 games are awful when played single player. But by default, they felt they had to include that option for people that maybe they didn't want to play online or didn't want to be challenged against a human opponent. They could just kick the computer's butt all day long and not have to worry about that. Now, in this day and age, increasingly, and for various reasons, developers are seemingly creating games either primarily as single-player games or as multiplayer games. It's becoming more common for designers to do this because they're targeting just one audience or the other. They aren't trying to do both as much as they used to. Some examples of single-player games: Red Dead Redemption 2. Which is a fantastic game. If you ever want to be in a Western, this is about as close as you can get. Play it, it is so much fun. Now, there is a multiplayer element to Red Dead Redemption 2, but you never hear anybody talk about it because it was a secondary thought that Rockstar Games just put in there to try to get more money off the game itself. But people play it primarily as a single-player game. Another example is the Uncharted series. This is a single-player game that does have some multiplayer mixed in, but nobody ever plays it or talks about it in that regard. It is primarily a single-player game. Another example is The Last of Us. And all three of these games were and are massively popular as single-player games. Each has a multiplayer function with it, which is generally ignored because the single-player campaign is so phenomenal, especially with The Last of Us. As a matter of fact, all three of these games, just incredible. But this does prove my point that video game makers are exclusively concentrating on either single-player campaigns and putting most of their funds into that, or multiplayer games and putting their funds primarily towards that. When they market and design these games, they're definitely aiming for one group or the other. While they both might contain elements by default of the opposite version of play, whether that be multiplayer or single player, they are primarily one or the other. So that brings us to the WDS games. Which category do WDS games fall into? Interesting. Are they single-player games that can be played in a multiplayer format? Or are they multiplayer games that can also be played in a single-player format? I don't know. Are they trying to get people sucked into the multiplayer game like Battlefield 1942? Or are they trying to appeal to those that like single-player games like The Last of Us does with their video games? Again, I'm not really sure which is the primary function for WDS games, or what they believe is their primary function. Now, Rich Walker, who designed a number of these Civil War games, wrote this: "Nearly all games give the player an option to play against the AI, and nearly all fall far short of being considered real competition. AI has come a long way, but in the end, the best game will be played against a competent human opponent." And Rich Hamilton, who is the lead programmer with WDS, wrote in a recent WDS forum that the AI is not a human replacement and never will be. Placing expectations on it as such is unrealistic. So based on these comments, it sounds like WDS games are more multiplayer games that just happen to have a single-player format that you can play. Is that fair? I don't know. I really don't. I feel like WDS is lost whether they're a multiplayer game or a single-player game. If you think they're one or the other, put it in the comments down below. I'm curious how everyone feels about it. Now, remembering what Rich Hamilton said, let's talk a little bit more. In my opinion, the AI only exists to offer new players the most basic introduction possible to WDS combat and gameplay. I think the AI is only there to suck people into these games and to hopefully eventually get them to play against other humans. At that point, the games become much more addictive. So maybe they are really just multiplayer games that pretend to be single-player games. I don't know. I do know the AI is not a competent opponent to play for anyone above the novice level. If you can't beat the AI regularly and consistently, you haven't advanced far enough to play against a human, because they are going to be infinitely more difficult to defeat in this game. Rich Walker wrote that, unlike chess, which has a limited and well-defined playing field with limited and well-defined units, in complex wargames such as this one, it is difficult to achieve an artificial intelligence that will be both challenging and unpredictable. In other words, humans will always pose a greater challenge. This brings me back to my original answer of why the AI exists, simply because they have to by default. I think WDS puts AI into these games just to give people a sort of taste of how much fun these games could be if played on the multiplayer level. So let's move on to the next question. How does the AI work? Well, let's examine it some. There are two different types of AI games. There are scripted AI games, and there are dynamic AI games. Let's start first with scripted. In these games, the human designer will create a unique script for the AI to follow in the battle. The script can inform the AI where to move, when to move, and what their objective is in the battle. Now, Rich Walker went on to write that the scripted system will, in most cases, provide the most challenging scenario to the human opponent. And that seems kind of interesting because a script has to be followed, correct? And once you know a script, there's no new surprises. You don't go back and watch the movie Gettysburg and expect the script to change. So how can a script offer a better challenge than something that's dynamic? Something to think about. The trick, he wrote, is anticipating future enemy movements. In most cases, this is more difficult than it sounds. And I think that's the crux of the problem with scripted games. If anything goes off script, the AI can't react. Now let's actually check out what a script looks like. So here we have the Battle of Antietam, and let me pull up the script which is going on in the background. There you go. This can be accessed through the scenario editor. I don't recommend checking this out for yourself unless you're comfortable using the scenario editor. But scripts become nearly useless when unexpected events occur which the AI has not been scripted to react to. And I've said that before. The AI is useless unless everything goes according to the plan which has been programmed into them. Rich Walker wrote that it is easier to script a strong attack than trying to anticipate an attack and make the proper scripting for a strong defense. And I suppose that does make sense. The more human variables and options there are, the harder it is for the AI to respond because they haven't been scripted to do so. So the AI will be stronger in an offensive game. Another drawback to scripts is that they have a hard time in multi-day scenarios as the variables increase exponentially with each move. After just a few moves in these games, there's an infinite number of variables which occur. And the script only has one option, to do what it's being told. So when you have a scenario which lasts longer than one day, it's going to be impossible to properly script that because a human opponent will always end up doing something unexpected. Or at least they should be doing something unexpected because if they aren't, they have a lot more to learn about these games. So, back to how the AI works. We've covered scripted, and now let's cover dynamic. Scripts do not exist in the dynamic method of AI programming. Instead, a number is used in the header dialog of the scenario editor for the AI to use instead. The number in the header dialog will tell the AI to conduct a defensive or offensive battle. The number will also tell the AI the intensity with which they should attack or defend their positions. So at least on the surface, dynamic games sound a lot more interesting and challenging than scripted games. But Rich Walker said that scripted games would offer a greater challenge. It's kind of interesting. Well, let's look at the game I actually just completed in the last episode. This is the header dialog from that game. And the number in these boxes here will tell the AI to either conduct a defensive or offensive battle. Now here's how all the numbers work. Feel free to hit pause and read through them, but in this particular example, both the Union and Rebel AI values were set to 4. Which means that they were programmed to conduct an extreme attack if controlled by the AI. So in the game I just completed, that was an extreme federal attack. And I was not even remotely challenged. So the dynamic system of AI play doesn't really seem to be working that well. So let's return back to this original question and then ask, why doesn't the dynamic method work better? Doesn't it make sense that if there's no script that the AI would think more outside the box and react to everything going on? Well, not necessarily, because there's so many variables. Remember what Rich wrote earlier, that these games were just too complex and that the AI would always struggle to keep up because of the unpredictable nature of human opponents. But that was written in 2007. How many of you still use the technology that you used in 2007? I mean, if you're still using one of the original iPhones, you have some serious problems. So has technology improved enough to where WDS could now present us with a very challenging AI if they wanted to? Well, I'm not really sure that's possible. As an example, let's take a game like chess. In a chess game, there are over 9 million variations of ways that you can move after just 3 turns. And there are 318 billion ways to play after just 4 moves. There are more possible iterations of chess games than there are atoms in the observable universe. Think about that. Now, computer chess programs were one of the first things developed for computers going back as far as the 1940s when computers were in their infancy. And it wasn't until the 1990s that computer chess programs could routinely beat the greatest chess players in the world. So it took 50 years for a computer program to finally reach the level of human play with the game as relatively, quote-unquote, as simple as chess. Well, WDS comes along in the 1990s with their games and says, hold my beer. Because in a WDS game, there are hundreds and hundreds of individual units that can be moved. And there aren't just 64 squares on the WDS map, there can be over 10,000 hexes. And you can move in numerous different ways. And there are modifiers and variables and probabilities. The complexity of these games compared to chess, it's not even in the same ballpark. If it took 50 years to teach a computer to beat a human at chess, it's completely possible that the AI will never advance to the point of realistically being able to challenge humans in these games. But that doesn't mean they can at least be more challenging. And we're going to talk about that in a future video. So now that we know how the AI works, let's keep going. What I'm going to do next is give the AI a rematch. There's a little 2001 Space Odyssey reference for you science fiction geeks out there. The old HAL 9000 Red-Eye. Rich Walker wrote that the scripted system will, in most cases, provide the most challenging scenario to the human opponent. So, before I played in a dynamic game against the AI at the Battle of Antietam. Well, I'm going to do it again, except in this case, I'm going to take on the AI in the specifically designed, scripted AI challenge of the Battle of Antietam. Will that scenario, after everything we've just learned, be able to present a harder challenge for me as a more advanced player? Or will there be no difference between the dynamic scenario and the scripted scenario? Well, we're going to find out in the next video. Alright everybody, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it as always. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them down below. And if you want to learn more about the American Civil War Gaming Club, you can go to acwgc.net and check us out there. Until next time everyone, just remember, keep gaming.